Draft these players in every round of your fantasy drafts. These are the best values in each round. If you're in the top half of the first round, you're not going wrong with any of these guys. Now, we have our tier 1 of these 5 guys, excluding CD. But again, in your first round, we're not going to tell you to take anyone outside of this tier. But in our best values for each round, we find Amon-Ra, Sun God, at pick 11. In this format that we're talking about, we're going over your regular redraft leagues, the best values in every round's PPR format. And wide receiver 3, Sun God, being drafted at the end just feels like the most value. Now, obviously, like I said, I have our tier 1, and then guys like Puka, Neighbors, Nico Collins, and Sun God, I all have in that tier of, if you're outside tier 1, get yourself one of them, because they're the players who have the highest upside just in terms of being your consistent, dominant wide receiver 1 that you want to be drafting your first round pick of. It's why we're not really taking Genty, because not to say I don't think he could produce like that, we have him as the 15th player in our rankings. So it's just a lovely second round pick, but might provide a little bit of hardship as your first round pick. That's why we're taking a ton of Sun God, and even hearing about this knee surgery that made us a little hesitant. It was pretty much just a little bit of going in there reconstructive surgery. Now, yes, this could definitely have effects. They say you shouldn't have any effects, but when it comes to any durations of not training, then getting back into that training, like just naturally, we know how the body adapts. So I wouldn't be mad with you taking the guys of your choice, but Sun God is our best value of round 1. And like we're saying, the reason Genty's 15 in our rankings is we're not taking him over D-Hen. D-Hen's a first round player being drafted in the second round, which is our best value of round 2. Obviously, there's a lot of good guys here, but in reality, if D-Hen gets taken in the first round, I like taking Brock Bowers. You can get away with taking Christian McCaffrey. A.J. Brown could be one of our next best values. This is your second round, you're not going to go wrong. But it's just about the round 1 players that you can get in round 2. This is for a 12-man 2, by the way. If you have a late first pick, you can come away with Sun God and D-Hen, and you have RB3 and RB4 from last year. 2 first-round values, in my opinion. Where we then come into round 3. Now, the bias in me, as the Tyreek Whisperer, he could definitely be, if returning to value and Tua stays healthy, the wide receiver drafted in round 3, like Cooper Kupp a couple years ago. It's that type of thing that makes me love getting a guy like Tyreek, but obviously we know the hesitancy after last year. As the Whisperer, he's retiring this year, and he was going to get 2,000 yards before retiring, and we thought it'd be last year. Maybe it's this year. We're going to see, for example, in our dynasty, how he starts off and probably trade him for his peak value. And it's why, if Tua stays healthy, it's definitely a great value, but it might not just be the best value of round 3. Guys like Josh Jacobs, similar things. Could be your second round players that should be being drafted sooner. Terry McLaurin, even a Chase Brown. But the single-handed player who beat all our teams last year, Kieran Williams, the only player we made a video about fading, and it was just because of some worries, which could definitely still be up in the air. The injury potential is obviously always there, and we obviously never want to really play for that. If I'm drafting Kieran, I definitely have a high value to get Blake Corum as well, just to pair that. But the reality is, he keeps showing that he can produce the workload. Ever since I noted him for the first time, he was one of those running backs who just churns. Now, obviously, you're paying the ADP for it, and sometimes you might not want to pay that because of the risk, but reality is, Kieran Williams is your best value of round 3. You go into round 4, you could say Lamar Jackson, last year's quarterback 1, but in most drafts, you're going to get our best value player, Jameson Williams, even later than this round. To draft wide receiver 24 off the board, who finishes wide receiver 22 last year, entering his vet season, as he says, per Waymo. The reality is, he can put up a ton of explosive points, and depending on what you think about Sun God and his surgery, it shouldn't even deter you, but it could definitely open things up. Obviously, Jameson Williams is the type of player who could give you a 1 or a 2 in a couple weeks this year, which is why round 4 is really early for him. But we have so many other guys that his upside should pay the price for wide receiver 24. And you probably see him finishing around wide receiver 16 with a ton of super explosive weeks, especially if your roster construction can put him at your flex. Obviously, like I said, Lamar Jackson, if that's your situation, is obviously going to kill. Smitty could be your other choice, depending on which wide receiver 2 you think is the best in the league. Last year, we said J-Mo, best wide receiver 2 in the league. Kittle is going to be a great value. Zay or Hurts, you can do what you like. But we say Jameson Williams is the best value in round 4. Taking us into round 5, there are a lot of players. Again, my personal bias will take Kenneth Walker majority of the times in this point in drafts, especially because I just believe he'll play every game this season, but he could always get hurt. He's a future Hall of Famer. We've dreamed 2, Jamar Chase before last year, and Kenneth Walker. We see Joe Burrow, who was our last year's best value in drafts, up to ADP where he should be, still at a value. So I love taking Joe Burrow at this price as well. Chris Godwin could have a slower start, but great value out here. But reality is, draft Marinara Kamara in your round 5. At the end of round 5, he should be available for most of your round 5, maybe 6 picks. And not only do we like his week 15 matchup for his playoff advancement, but barring injury, which is the only reason he won't return value, which is why I also like drafting Devin Neal. Not a fan of Kendre Miller, but he is going to put up the points that you're looking for out here in the 5th round, especially if he's your RB2 or depending on how you drafted, flex. Marinara Kamara is the best value of round 5. And round 6, we had a lot of switching back and forth between from Chris Olave, who was one of our first Fade Fridays of the year. Check out Fantasy Destin Instagram if you weren't caught up on that. We had our Fade Fridays. We're still finishing our Winter Wednesdays, the most important videos, which is the only reason you should actually go there and check it out, alongside the giveaway coming up. You could check our last video for that. But we had also been drafting a lot of Pearsall, who you see here later. Now, more frequently in best ball, but he's not practicing right now. He's got the hamstring lingering. You know me, I love Pearsall. I felt like he was a great value and should take the step with Ayuk in the down year. But man, you just gotta look at it. We know what hamstring injuries are. They're those lingering, annoying motherfuckers. Pearsall probably goes in and out throughout the season. Year 2, yeah, we're gonna love it. We'll probably get him more at a discount next year. You ask the entire San Fran organization who feels like wide receiver 1, and Juwan tells you himself it's him. It's just a part of what they love about him. Last year we were drafting him as our last round pick in some drafts, knowing what he does in come playoff time, and all the injuries gave him the spotlight to take that role. And with the Ayuk down year, with this potential Pearsall back and forth that will have some productive weeks, the reality is Juwan Jennings and Kittle are your most productive players in San Francisco. Obviously, paying the ADP for Christian McCaffrey, you'd hope it's him too. If he stays healthy, it will be. But out here in the 6th round, Juwan Jennings is actually the player we had to highlight as the best value. And then taking it into your 7th round, again, I'm going to let you choose between Jaden Reed or Khalil Shakir. Both who are actually, according to Sleeper at least, the wide receiver 1s on their teams. Alongside what we saw last year, we see the extension for Khalil Shakir. We know that his fantasy production hasn't been the most insane ever, but it's very consistent. Out here in the 7th round, being a potential wide receiver 2 or a flex, you know you're going to get a majority of games from Shakir with 6 catches for enough points to be viable in your starting lineup. Jaden Reed, on the other hand, can get you 33-point games a ton, which Shakir has in his bag too, but it's more of Reed's bag, which comes with the cost of more 0 to 4 to 8-point games as well. It's why after looking everything over, alongside liking taking your shot on guys like Golden, we're highlighting Khalil Shakir as the best value in 7th rounds of drafts this year. We'll take it on over to the 8th, where I originally thought I was always going to say Downs. But reality is, especially in your redraft leagues, Downs will be much harder to choose when to start. He could be a great flex play. You'll be happy having him. Kupp, if he stays healthy, could be a similar situation of just a couple weeks, probably better in best ball, but will produce as the wide receiver 2 attentions on JSN, and you got Kupp out there on cornerback 2s. He should only recover more from the ankle injury that we knew would limit him for the remainder of that last year's season. He's still Cooper Kupp. Booper Buppington. Obviously, regression is incoming. But from Downs, Kupp, Igbuka, Mooney, a lot of these guys are very valuable. If you haven't gotten your quarterback, take your Bo Nix, QB7. Kyler Murray, a top 10 QB, year 7. That's up to you. I'm not a fan. Jaylen Warren, especially with Aaron Rodgers now, it's up to you what you really think the RB situation will be. But as the pass catching back, Warren could definitely have some games. And whether he's a viable starter for you or not, could definitely turn trade value. We highlight Pacheco as the best value player of round 8. We were trying to target him at the end of last year and ended up never doing it because we saw that it was just going to take more time for the body to adapt. You have such a big injury like that, it's not necessarily an injury that you expect year 2 production, but to come back at the end of the season, you obviously got to give yourself some time to get back in that Pacheco level churning, which he got to have at the end of last season, that might not have looked the same, but all starts planting the seeds for him to grind this offseason. And man, a lot of people are just scared of what the Chiefs do. They feel like they bring in an RB, use him for a season, and let him go. Reality is, let Pacheco churn. The best value here in our 8th rounds of fantasy drafts. If he has the role, he goes back to a borderline RB1, RB2 that you can be having on your bench. We got a few more rounds here considering a 16-round draft to give you the most value possible and would take you into the 9th, where you also got a lot of guys you could like. Depending on situationally, if you've gotten a tight end yet, or if you want to wait for likely, who we'll get to in a second, you can have RJ Harvey, DeAndre Swift. They're great values out here. RJ Harvey's going to be better late in the season. Swift's going to be what he is throughout the season as a team's RB1 that might not reach team expectations yet, but will be glitchy. Will produce a few weeks for sure, and can definitely be a plug and play considering you're drafting him to be on your bench, and he could end up in your flex or traded away. But tight end 7 off the board is who we value the most here in the 9th round, Jonnu Smith. Again, it's tied to Tua. As Tua stays healthy, it doesn't really matter too much for Jonnu, who's been a great tight end value that, I've said it before, was one of those players who it felt like a lot of people expected production from. And yes, he had it, but it really started to kick once people gave up on it. He showed you that he's a top 5 tight end in the league and should realistically be spammed again all this year. Being able to draft him out here in your 9th round is why, even though we think guys like RJ Harvey and Swift and maybe Scatterbo could be great values out here, Jared Goff as well, the best value in our 9th rounds of drafts this year is Jonnu Smith. Taking you into the 10th rounds, there's a few names. Evan Engram should finish as a top 10 tight end, right about at his ADP. Keon Coleman could be the dominant wide receiver 1. You could take your Justin Herbert, who we have finishing as, I think, QB 11, and could very easily break your top 10, being drafted at QB 14, but wide receiver 53 feels like the easiest smash value in Captain Kirk. You see his counterpart, Jaden Higgins, over there, who's in Sleeper listed as the wide receiver 2. He's going to be a similar build and body to Nico Collins. Playing alongside him, that could get glitchy, especially in the early side of the season. I want to give Higgins time, and I know what Captain Kirk is capable of, eating out of the slot role. It's Captain Kirk. He's finishing out his prime in a new situation. I like what he has in store. Being drafted at wide receiver 53, sure. I like his counterpart here too, Jaden Higgins. If you're a believer in a guy like Trey Harris, whatever, you can do any of it. But the reality is, in your 10th rounds of drafts, who's the best value, the most likely player to return value at this pick? Captain Kirk. Whether he ends up playing for you because you could trade away your earlier guys for value, or you just get to trade your 10th round pick 4 weeks into the season. Now, the 11th round is a little different here. The best value in our 11th rounds of drafts, you're actually not seeing in this list of 12, because we're reaching to the next round of drafts knowing that Javonte Williams is not only the best value of your 12th rounds of fantasy drafts, but even your 11th. Take him in round 11. He's going to be a starter. He's our J.K. Dobbins of last year. If Dallas is what people expect it to be, which I feel like there's some weird Dallas voodoo that CeeDee Lamb, Pickens, Dak just don't finish as high as the greatness should, I still think Javonte, not only entering his prime as a skilled RB, who similarly to Jonnu's career situation, feels like this is your time for the value. And if no voodoo does go on, he's in a great situation as the RB1. Clear. End of story. And because we took him around early, that allows us to get the other best value, or as we'll call it, the best value of your 12th rounds of fantasy drafts, Isaiah Likely. We said we'd talk about him here before. Harbaugh says he is an all-star tight end. We watched it week 1 of last year against the Chiefs, and then understood, okay, when you expect the Baltimore glitchy weeks, play Likely. When it's more of a base, D-hen kind of churn week, Likely could definitely still produce, but he could also be a dud. That's what we saw from last season, and we're only seeing Mark Andrews flush more out and Likely come more in to fill this all-star role as the best value in your 12th rounds of fantasy drafts. Now, we really start to get sweaty because there's 4 rounds left. Sure, in your 13th rounds, the best value is probably Tua. Now, if you don't want to be attached to that injury risk, whatever. Last time he played all 17 games, he was a top 10 QB. And again, as Tyreek Whisperer bias, to a dynasty owner believer, I have him playing all 17 weeks this year. That's why I'm not attached to taking any of these guys out here. Thielen could be a value. Leggett could be a value. Rashad White even. Kyle Pitts, depending on what you've done. But Tua, out here, if you didn't draft a QB or want a high upside backup, is your most likely player to return value. But you could always sneak in what we'll tell you to do in the next round. Because really, I would tell you in your 13th round to do this, but you can probably still do it in your 14th. Aubrey, kicker 1, is going to just churn your starting lineup that much more than anyone else. You've got your lineup. You've got your roster. Look at all the players we've drafted already. Just get your kicker. Get the best kicker in the league. Have that positional advantage throughout the entire season. Same thing here now. Move us on to the 15th round, which, like I said, you don't need Tua. You could do Aubrey in your 13th, and then your defense here in the 14th. The positional value, because we know we just drafted the best team. So what more are any of these other players gonna do for us? Maybe a Dobbins or a Pierce, or our best value in this round, Hunter Henry, that we're going to tell you should be able to pick the best D, the D of your choice, which we have as the Broncos. Broncos should finish as the number 1 D through the first 3 weeks of the season. And then pick up the Vikings for weeks 4 and 5, and we'll stream from there. That's why we're just telling you, again, pick your kicker of choice. Pick your defensive choice. Just do it 1 round earlier than everyone else would, because now watch. These guys probably, after you take the Broncos, draft their Ds, and Hunter Henry makes it to you in your last round of drafts. And it's not like we need any of these players late because we already built the team. But even if you don't get your Hunter Henry, who we have as the best value in your 15th rounds of drafts, which if you take your kicker 13 and defense 14, you can take him. We'll finish off here round 16 with the best value out here. The reason you're okay to go get your D and kicker of choice is because we know, well, everyone's picking their D and kicker in the last 2 rounds. Casually, we'll just bring in a Pop Douglas, who was just as valuable as the players that we picked our kicker over. Obviously, there's always a chance he doesn't produce. Duh, he's your 16th round pick. But the fact that there's such a good chance he does, that's why he wraps up our best value players to draft in every round of fantasy drafts this year. So now when you're drafting, you know what players to take before everyone else because there's just such clear value. You're not going to get caught drafting players that don't help your team at all just because they were up there in ADP. No, we understand what the lobbies look like. We understand the most valuable players round by round, and we come away with the best teams after draft day. It's why we're winning $100,000 in fantasy football. This is our 2nd season as Fantasy Destined, and the line's currently over under 4.2 years for 420. That'll allow us the 27th season to go win our 100K if we haven't already. And this is just the littlest bit of insight that goes into as why. Let us know what you think down below. Keep us consistent, trying to post twice a week. Been posting more like once every other week. So expect a lot more videos coming. Let us know what's the most valuable things for you, and we'll give you our thoughts and our insights. And we're winning all our fantasy leagues this year. If you win in fantasy, subscribe to Fantasy Destined. Follow us on all socials at Fantasy Destined, and let's have a year, baby. Woo! Fantasy Destined, the greatest fantasy footballer of all time. Call me your consultant. Giveaway coming soon. Not only with fantasy funds, rankings, and consulting. Ooh! Fantasy Destined to the moon, baby! It's a destiny!